Movies have been around for over 100 years now. And over these 100 years, we have seen great change in movies. From technology, to black and white, to color, to the characters themselves. And no character has changed more than the movie villains. A villain, as defined by Merriam-Webster, is a character in a story or play who opposes the hero, or even the one just blamed for particular evil or difficulty. Interestingly, this was an old French word originally meaning peasant, farmer, commoner, etc. It wouldn't be until 1822 that the character was changed to coincide with what we know today. And of course, as provided by Screencraft, there are many different types of villains. One such villain being anti-villains, ones who do evil or morally questionable things but are perceived in a good way. Example of this would be Dr. Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs. Authority figures are the perceived evil by our characters, mainly used in comedies. Example, Principal Rooney from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. The corrupt are characters who were once good, or at the very least considered ordinary people, who then turned evil, usually by an outside force. Jack Torrance from The Shining was influenced by the spirits at the Overlook Hotel, thus beginning and ending his downfall. Andrew from The Chronicle came into contact with a supposedly magical rock that gave him and his friends abilities, but unlike his friends, he had more home issues. This, combined with his powers, gave him a sense of entitlement and put him on the path to villainy. The Disturbed are our villains with psychological issues. This is Norman Bates from Psycho, who is believed to have had DID, dissociative identity disorder, and Annie from Misery. Other villains would also include the Equal, villains who are the same or similar to our heroes in every way except for how they use their abilities. We actually mainly see these in superhero origin movies, believe it or not. Obadiah Stane from Iron Man could have been what Tony Stark could turn into had he not had a change in heart. Red Skull from Captain America the First Avenger could have been what Steve Rogers turned into had he not had such a strong moral compass. And Killmonger from Black Panther could have been what T'Challa turned into had he been raised in a different circumstance. The henchmen are the ones who work for the ultimate villain or the mastermind. We'll get to that in a minute. These examples of the henchmen, are actually Loki from Avengers, as we can later learn on in the series, and Darth Vader from the Star Wars series, which we also learn later. The mastermind are the ones, like mentioned, are the ones who controls the henchmen. They're usually very intelligent, but also very hands-off, preferring others to do their work for them. An example of this would, again, be Thanos from the Marvel Universe. He manipulates multiple people, including Loki, Ronan from the Avengers, even his own children, into doing what he wants. And Emperor Palpatine of the Star Wars series also is considered in this section because he manipulated Anakin Skywalker into becoming Darth Vader. The personification of evil villains are for lack of better terms, pure evil villains. These are our Wicked Witch of the West from Wizard of Oz, Evil Queen from Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, and Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. Timeline. For the purposes of this video, we're splitting up Hollywood timelines into classic cinema, going from 1910s to 1960 to modern cinema, 1960 to present. In classic cinema, we have the personification of evil and the disturbed villains, while in modern cinema we have the more complex and shades of gray villains. Classic villains are very are portrayed in a very us versus them, good versus evil persona. Good will always win against what's the perceived other. And it's usually pretty easy to define who's the evil, the one wearing all dark, the one who has some sort of physical ailment or is just not beautiful by society standards. Even though there are some who break that mold, such as Norman Bates from Psycho. He is actually perceived to be a very normal looking guy. And the goals of these characters are usually just as simple: greed, power, wrath, and their morality is supposed to be the opposite of the heroes. And as for modern villains, these are characters who are just as, if not even more complex than our heroes. And they can range anywhere from purposeful evil, accidental evil, or even perceived evil, as mentioned before. Interestingly, the rise of these villains actually coincide with the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War of the 1960s and 70s, showing that people are flawed and the society and system itself is flawed. Wisecrack even points out that some of these characters could have been perceived as heroes or even flawed protectors if told differently. But why are we even attracted to these villains? Simply to quote Mary Wollstonecraft, "No man chooses evil because it is evil. He mistakes it for happiness, the good he seeks." We like villains because we can see ourselves in them. We can see the mistakes they made that led them to this path, and we can see how easily we could have made the same mistakes under different circumstances. Some of these villains are sympathetic. Some of them offer a strange catharsis, a way that we can see a piece of ourselves in the villain. And now, why did they even change over time? Simple, because society changed over time. Villains are meant to reflect our societal fears, our anxieties. For classic cinema, it was a simple us versus them mentality because that's how we wanted to see the world. The Cold War, for example, it was simply US versus USSR or communism, whichever you want to prefer it as. In the 70s, we started seeing the system itself was corrupt, so we saw our villains becoming corrupt systems, and so we, the viewers, had to fight against that. We also saw some of that in the 80s too, even if we also saw some of the other type of villains in the 80s too. In the 90s, we see discontent with suburbia and middle class. We see discontent in the form of starting to challenge the system and even domestic violence cases. It was also in the 90s that we would see the Waco bombings of April 1993, when a disgruntled man decided to bomb a postal office and killing many people. Similarly, in the 2000s, we saw the tragic events of 9/11, and we saw a rise of amoral and terroristic villains, just as the Joker from The Dark Knight and Anton from No Country for Old Men. People who don't seem to have a real rhyme or reason for the evil they do. In the 2010s, we see villains who are actually questioning the systems. In the 70s, these would have been our heroes. But with a twist, these villains are radicals willing to do anything to fix what they perceive as a broken world. Sometimes and then turning themselves into a villain when they could have just as easily been a hero. And now we are at the start of the 2020s, where already real life itself is chaotic enough, but now we are going to see what our villains are going to tell us about the future in the upcoming years.